They say time heals all wounds. But when I buried my husband, time didn't heal me, it exposed me. Because the man I mourned for wasn't the man I married. He left behind secrets so cruel, so humiliating, they threatened to erase me from my own story. And when I finally opened the door to what he'd been hiding, I realized I wasn't just a widow. I was a woman scorned. Do you want to know what I found on the other side? Comment where you're watching from and subscribe if you want to hear more stories like mine. I always thought marriage was supposed to be a partnership. Two people walking side by side, sharing dreams, secrets, and burdens. But if I'm being honest with y'all, my marriage was never truly that way. My husband Charles was a good provider, yes. He kept a roof over our heads, food on the table, and clothes on our backs. Folks in the neighborhood used to point at us and say, "Now that's a respectable family." But what people saw on the outside wasn't the truth. Behind closed doors, Charles was a man of many rules. And one of them was that there were parts of his life I had no business knowing. The biggest rule of all, I was never, under any circumstances, allowed near his second house. Now let me explain. This wasn't some little shack or shed in the backyard. No, this was a whole other house, across town, sitting on a quiet little street where the trees lined up neat as soldiers. He bought it when our oldest boy, James, was still in grade school. I remember asking him, "Charles, why do we need another house when we already got one?" He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Don't worry about it. Just know it ain't for you." And that was the end of the conversation. For decades, I lived with that. My friends would ask, "Mary, what's Charles doing with that other place? Y'all renting it out?" And I'd laugh it off, say something like, "Oh, you know Charles, always got some investment cooking." But deep down, I hated it. I hated the way he locked that part of himself away from me, like I was some stranger and not the woman who washed his clothes, bore his children, and stood by him through everything. Sometimes, when he thought I wasn't paying attention, I'd see him slipping out late at night, carrying bags I'd never packed for him. He'd be gone for hours, sometimes whole weekends, and when I asked where he'd been, he'd give me that hard stare, the kind that shut me up quick. I learned early that questioning him too much only led to shouting, or worse, that cold silence that could freeze me out for days. My children noticed, of course. James and my baby girl, Loretta, they'd ask, "Mama, why Daddy got another house? Why can't we go see it?" And I'd force a smile and say, "Because that's Daddy's business, not ours." I didn't believe it myself, but what else could I tell them? That their father kept secrets from us. That the man they admired wasn't as honest as he seemed? No, I swallowed it all. I kept the peace, like so many women of my generation were taught to do. But that silence sat heavy on my chest, year after year. Still, life went on. Birthdays, graduations, family dinners, church on Sundays. We played our parts like actors on a stage. And in those moments when Charles laughed at the table or held our grandbaby in his arms, I let myself believe maybe the other house was nothing. Maybe it was just some silly pride thing of his. I told myself, "Mary, stop poking at old wounds. Let sleeping dogs lie." But the truth never lies quiet for long. I remember one evening, about 15 years into that house being in our lives, when I tried to test the boundary, Charles had left his keys on the dresser, and I noticed one key I didn't recognize. Long, silver, with a little red tag on it. My heart jumped because I knew it had to be for that house. My hands trembled as I picked it up, turning it over in my palm. Part of me thought, this is my chance. I could drive over there, open that door, and finally know. But before I could slip it into my pocket, Charles walked in. The look on his face. Lord have mercy. His eyes darkened, his jaw clenched, and he snatched the keys so fast you'd think I was holding fire. He didn't raise his voice. No, that would have been too easy. Instead, he leaned in real close and whispered, "Don't you ever touch those again? That house ain't yours, and it never will be." The chill in his words cut me deeper than any shout could have. I never tried again. And so, the years stretched on. that second house becoming like a shadow hanging over my marriage. Every time Charles disappeared for the night, every time money went missing from our accounts, every time he came home smelling of cologne I didn't own, I thought of that place. My friends' husbands retired and settled into home life, but Charles kept secrets right up until the day his heart gave out. When the doctor told me he was gone, I felt a strange mixture of grief and release. Don't misunderstand me, I mourned him. I cried for the man I thought I had, for the life we were supposed to share. But in the quiet of that hospital room, with the machines beeping and my children holding my hands, I also felt something else. Curiosity. A hunger for answers. Because if death could no longer keep him from me, maybe, just maybe, that second house could finally give me the truth. And that's exactly what happened 2 weeks later, when we all gathered in the lawyer's office for the reading of his will. My children sat beside me, eyes red from tears, while the lawyer shuffled papers and cleared his throat. He spoke of property, bank accounts, pensions, things I already knew. Then he paused, looked straight at me, and slid a small envelope across the table. Inside were 2 keys. He said, "Mrs. Jackson, your husband left this for you," he said, and I quote, "It's yours now. Whatever I was hiding, you'll find it there." My breath caught in my throat. The whole room went still. My daughter gasped, and my son whispered, "Mama, no." But me, I just stared at those keys, feeling the weight of decades pressing down on my chest. For the first time in my life, I had permission. The door that had been locked against me for nearly 40 years was finally mine to open. And Lord, I had no idea what was waiting for me on the other side. I sat there in that lawyer's office with my whole body stiff as stone, those keys heavy in my hand. My fingers curled around them tight, like if I let go, the truth would slip away forever. The lawyer's words were still ringing in my ears. "It's yours now. Whatever I was hiding, you'll find it there." The way he said it, so calm, so professional, like he hadn't just cracked my whole world open. My daughter Loretta reached over, touched my wrist. "Mama, you don't need to go there. Just leave it." Her voice was soft but firm, the way she talked to her own kids when they were trying to touch a hot stove. James, my oldest, leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "Daddy didn't want you there. If he gave it to you now, maybe it's better left alone." I looked at my children, grown with their own families, their own lives, and still they were afraid of their father's shadow, afraid of what I might find, afraid of the storm that house could unleash. But I wasn't afraid, not anymore. I'd lived too long swallowing secrets that weren't mine, carrying shame I didn't deserve. If Charles thought he could bury the truth with him, he underestimated me. Death had freed me from his rules. That house was mine now, and by God I was going to see it. The rest of the will blurred by in a fog. Property lines, retirement accounts, pensions, percentages carved up neat and tidy, but my mind stayed locked on those keys. When we finally stepped out into the sunlight, the air felt heavy. My family clustered around me like bodyguards, whispering warnings I didn't ask for. "Mama, don't torture yourself. It's just a house. Please, just let it be." I didn't answer them. I slipped the keys into my purse and walked to the car. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the old clock tick, every second dragging me closer to what I knew I had to do. Memories played in my head like a broken record. Charles coming home late, his shirt smelling of perfume that wasn't mine. The time I found lipstick on his collar, bright red, a shade I never wore. The envelopes that showed up in the mail with strange return addresses, snatched up before I could see. The way he snapped at me when I asked questions. All of it circled back to that house. I got up, padded barefoot to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. My reflection in the window looked tired, worn. A woman who had spent her whole life doing what was expected. Keeping her head down, keeping the peace. I touched my face and whispered, "Not anymore." The next morning, I told Loretta I needed to go out for groceries. She offered to drive me, but I waved her off. I needed to do this alone. I put on my best Sunday dress, not because I wanted to look good for anyone, but because I wanted to walk into whatever truth waited for me with my head held high. The drive across town felt longer than it was. My heart pounded the closer I got, like a drum inside my chest. I recognized the street from the times I'd driven past years ago, pretending not to notice the house sitting there like a forbidden temple. It was modest but neat, with shutters painted green and a little patch of garden out front. The grass was cut. The flowers were watered. Someone had been tending to it. I parked across the street and just sat there for a minute, staring. My hands shook when I reached into my purse and pulled out the keys. The smaller one had that same red tag I remembered from years ago. I held it in the light, let the metal glint, and thought about all the times I'd wanted to slip it into a lock but hadn't dared. Now I dared. I stepped out the car, the morning air cool on my skin, carrying the faint smell of honeysuckle. Every step up the walkway felt heavy, like I was marching to my own trial. My knees ached, but I didn't stop. At the door, I slid the key into the lock. For a moment, my whole body trembled so bad I had to steady myself against the door frame. Behind me, I heard a voice. "Mrs. Jackson?" I spun around. It was my son-in-law, David, Loretta's husband. He must have followed me. He looked uneasy, his eyes darting to the house. "You shouldn't be here. Loretta asked me to keep an eye on you. This place, it's not good for you." I narrowed my eyes. "What do you know about it?" He shifted his weight, cleared his throat. "Nothing, just don't go in there. Some things are better left buried." I stared at him hard. David had always been too eager, too curious about Charles's business, and the way he wouldn't meet my eye told me plenty. He knew something. Maybe not everything, but enough to make him nervous. "You tell Loretta she don't need to worry," I said, my voice steady. "This is my burden to carry, my truth to uncover, and I ain't turning back now." With that, I turned the key. The lock clicked, loud and final like the closing of a coffin. I pushed the door open. The hinges groaned, the smell of stale air rushing out like a ghost, and what I saw inside froze me where I stood. The second that door groaned open, I felt the years pressing down on me. 40 years of being told no. 40 years of swallowing questions and hiding suspicions. My hand still rested on the knob, and for a moment I almost couldn't make myself step inside. It felt like crossing a line I'd never be able to uncross, like stepping into a truth I might not survive. The air that spilled out wasn't stale, not like an empty house should be. It was warm, carrying the faint traces of lemon cleaner, candle wax, and something floral. My breath caught in my throat. If this place had been abandoned, it should have smelled of dust and shadows. But no, someone had been here, recently. I stepped inside slowly, my heart hammering. The floor beneath my shoes creaked, and the sound echoed through the silence like a warning. My purse strap slipped from my shoulder, and I clutched it tighter, as if it could protect me from whatever waited. The living room came into view first. My knees weakened. The furniture was arranged neatly, polished wood gleaming under the faint shafts of sunlight that slipped through half-drawn curtains. A vase of flowers sat on a side table, wilted, but not dead. The clock on the wall ticked softly, steady as a heartbeat. I whispered under my breath, "Lord, what is this?" Because it wasn't some forgotten investment property. It wasn't some dusty, empty space. It was lived in. The couch cushions were indented, as though someone had just risen from them. A quilt lay folded over the back, stitched by hand. I recognized the pattern. It wasn't mine, but it looked like something a grandmother would have made. Every stitch a story. My hand reached for the nearest picture frame, sitting right on the mantel. My stomach knotted. Charles. There he was, younger by 10 years, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in decades. His arm wrapped around a woman I'd never met, her face close to his, both of them glowing like newlyweds. My fingers trembled so badly I almost dropped the frame. I set it down quick and backed up, nearly tripping over the edge of the rug. My eyes darted around the room, searching for some explanation. Maybe it was an old friend, a distant cousin, someone he was helping out. But the way he held her in that photo... No, I knew better. I moved deeper, each step heavier than the last. My shoes clicked against the hardwood floor, my pulse thudding louder with every breath. The hallway stretched ahead, lined with doors. My hand brushed along the wall, the paint smooth, freshly done. He'd kept this place alive. He hadn't just owned it, he'd nurtured it. I reached the kitchen next, and my stomach lurched again. Clean dishes stacked neatly in the cabinets, a loaf of bread, not yet stale, sitting on the counter. The refrigerator hummed softly, and when I opened it, rows of groceries stared back at me. Milk, eggs, fresh vegetables. My husband hadn't just hidden a house. He'd hidden a home. I staggered back, clutching the counter for support. Tears blurred my vision, but I forced myself onward. I needed answers. I needed to see it all. I walked toward a closed door at the end of the hall. My hand hovered over the knob. My breath came shallow, uneven. For years, I'd wondered what he kept here. For years, I'd imagined it. Maybe another office, maybe storage, maybe something harmless. But nothing about what I'd seen so far was harmless. I whispered a prayer. God, give me strength. Then I turned the knob. The door swung open to reveal a bedroom. My heart stopped. The bed was made, fresh linens tucked tight, a pair of slippers placed neatly at the foot. On the dresser, more photographs. I walked closer, my hands trembling, my body cold as ice. And then I saw it. Charles, again. But this time, he wasn't alone. A child stood beside him, maybe 10 years old, smiling wide, her small hand clasped in his. Her curls framed her face, and her eyes, those big brown eyes, looked like his. So much it hurt. I dropped the frame. The glass cracked across the floor. My knees gave way and I sank down, pressing my hands over my mouth to stifle the scream rising in my throat. My husband hadn't just betrayed me. He had a whole other life inside these walls, and I had just stepped into it. The house was too quiet. Not the kind of quiet you get in an empty building, where dust hangs in the air and every sound echoes. No, this quiet had weight to it, like the hush that falls when a secret is about to be told. I took a step deeper into the living room, my shoes sinking into thick carpet that was far too new, far too soft to belong to some forgotten place. The blinds were drawn tight, but thin lines of sunlight pushed their way in, cutting across polished wood furniture that gleamed like it had just been dusted. The smell, Lord, the smell still lingered with that faint trace of perfume and lemon polish. Somebody had been here. Recently. I turned in a slow circle, my heart heavy in my chest. This wasn't just a property. It wasn't some investment my husband forgot about. This was a home, a lived-in home. On the mantel, picture frames lined up neat as soldiers. My breath hitched when I picked one up. My Charles. There he was, smiling with a joy I hadn't seen on his face in decades. His arm wrapped tight around a woman I didn't know. She was younger, pretty, with a smile that said she belonged there beside him. My fingers shook as I put it back. I reached for another frame, then another, each one cut deeper than the last. Charles at a picnic. Charles at what looked like a birthday party, balloons and cake in the background. And then, Charles sitting with a little girl on his lap. My knees nearly buckled. She was no stranger's child. She had his nose, his eyes, the same stubborn chin, and the way he held her, like she was his whole world. My husband had a daughter. I sat down hard on the couch, pressing a hand against my chest. 40 years of loyalty, 40 years of building a life together, and this was what he'd been hiding behind that locked door. Not a business, not a rental, a whole other family. I don't know how long I sat there staring at those photographs, flipping through the albums stacked on the shelf. Each page told me a story I had never been invited to hear. Christmas mornings, school plays, church picnics. There he was, my husband, laughing, clapping, glowing with pride. Pride I hadn't seen in him for years. Pride he never gave me. A sickness rolled through me, hot and cold at once. All those nights I sat alone waiting for him, all those excuses, all those missing dollars from our bank account. I saw it plain now. He wasn't working late. He wasn't handling business. He was here, with them. I pushed myself up, legs trembling, and wandered farther into the house. The kitchen nearly broke me. The counters were spotless, dishes stacked neatly, and on the fridge a calendar hung with little notes written in a neat, looping hand. Choir practice. Doctor's visit. College fund due. He hadn't just built a house. He'd built a life, a future. I backed into the hallway, my hand dragging along the wall for balance. The first door I opened revealed a bedroom. The bed was neatly made, covered with a quilt stitched in sunflowers. On the dresser, more pictures. Him and that same woman, their hands entwined. Him kissing the girl's cheek as she grew into a teenager. The walls weren't bare. They were filled with framed certificates, drawings in childish crayon, snapshots of moments that should have been part of my life but weren't. I stepped closer to a larger frame hanging above the bed. My heart stopped. A portrait. Charles, dressed in his best suit, smiling that rare, open smile. Beside him stood the same woman, looking proud, and in front of them, the girl. Grown now, wearing a white gown, maybe from graduation, maybe from church. She stood tall, radiant, her parents' pride shining through. And that's when it hit me hardest. He'd been saving his tenderness, his gentleness for them, for her, for a life that excluded me completely. I staggered back, pressing my palm to my mouth to keep from crying out. My chest heaved, the room spinning around me. And then I froze, because through the suffocating silence, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, steady, coming from the back of the house. My blood turned to ice. I wasn't alone. My hands were still trembling when I picked up the broken frame, shards of glass glittering like little knives against the floor. I turned it over carefully, staring at the girl's face. She was so young in that picture, 10, maybe 11. But those eyes, Lord, those eyes were Charles's eyes. The shape, the way they crinkled when she smiled. I knew in my bones what it meant. My husband hadn't just kept another house, he'd built another family. I stumbled backward, my knees knocking against the dresser. My chest felt like it was caving in, like the air was being pressed out of me. A sob clawed its way up my throat, but I swallowed it down. I didn't want to give this house my tears. Not yet. Not until I understood the full weight of what I was seeing. I set the frame down gently and looked around the room again. On the nightstand was a stack of school pictures, each one in a cheap little cardboard frame, the kind you get from the photography company that comes around every fall. I picked them up one by one. The girl growing older, from kindergarten pigtails to braces in middle school to a shy, almost grown teenager in a graduation cap. And always, always, Charles by her side. Sometimes with his arm around her shoulders, sometimes holding her hand, sometimes laughing at her like she was the light of his whole damn world. That laugh. It had been gone from our marriage for decades. He gave it to her instead. I pressed my palm to my chest, trying to steady the shaking. The betrayal sank in deeper than I thought possible. My husband, the man I had stood beside through sickness, through debt, through raising children and burying parents, had given his love, his joy, his tenderness to someone else's child. No, not someone else's. His. I had to sit down. I perched on the edge of the bed, the quilt soft beneath me, stitched with a pattern of sunflowers. Every detail screamed of a life he had poured himself into, a life that had nothing to do with me. I whispered to the empty air, "You gave them everything. and you left me scraps. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Not the creak of an old house settling, not my imagination. Real, steady footsteps, moving down the hallway toward me. My whole body tensed. I rose slowly, clutching the school pictures to my chest like they could shield me. My mind raced. Was it Loretta's husband again, following me? Was it someone watching over the house? My heart pounded so loud I thought it might give me away. The footsteps drew closer until they stopped right outside the bedroom door. The knob turned, and there she was. The girl from the photos, but older now. A young woman in her early 20s, standing in the doorway with wide eyes. She had her father's jawline, his walk, even his way of squinting when she was surprised. Her voice was sharp when she spoke. "What are you doing in my house?" The words hit me like a slap. My house. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. For decades I'd been locked out, and now here I was face to face with the secret Charles had protected more fiercely than anything else. "I asked you a question," she said, her arms folding across her chest. "Who are you? Why are you here?" My throat was dry, but I forced the words out. I'm his wife." Her expression shifted. Confusion, then anger, then something softer flickering in her eyes. She stepped into the room, her gaze darting to the photographs scattered across the dresser. She picked one up, the one of her and Charles at what looked like her high school graduation. She held it tight, her knuckles white. "No," she whispered. "That's not possible. My mama was his wife, not you." The bottom dropped out of my stomach. He hadn't just lied to me. He had lied to her, too. Lied to both of us so deeply we were standing in front of each other now. Strangers bound by his betrayal. I shook my head, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. "Child, I was his wife for 40 years. You're his daughter." Her face crumpled, and for a second I saw the little girl from the pictures, confused and hurting. But then she straightened, her jaw hardening. "You don't belong here," she said coldly. "This house is ours. Whatever he told you, whatever papers you got, this place, it don't belong to you." The room spun. The walls seemed to close in on me. Everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my family, my life, it was unraveling faster than I could catch it. And in that moment, as her words cut into me, I realized something terrible. Not only had my husband betrayed me, but his other family was ready to fight me for the very house he had left behind. The footsteps grew louder, steady, deliberate, until they stopped just outside the bedroom door. My throat tightened, my heart slamming so hard it felt like the walls themselves could hear it. I braced myself, my hand gripping the edge of the dresser like an anchor. The knob turned, and in she walked. The woman from the pictures. Older now, her beauty softened with time, but still there, carried in the curve of her cheekbones, the way her chin lifted as though daring me to challenge her right to exist in this house. Her hair, streaked with silver, was pulled back in a neat bun. She froze when she saw me, her eyes narrowing as they flicked to the photographs I had scattered across the dresser. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was low but sharp, each word a blade. For a moment, I couldn't answer. The betrayal sat like a stone in my throat. My mouth went dry, my fingers curling against the wood as if I could squeeze strength from it. Finally, I managed, "I could ask you the same." Her eyes darkened. "This is my home," I laughed, bitter and hollow. "Your home. He bought this house while he was still married to me, while I was raising his children, while I was waiting for him every night, cooking his meals, washing his clothes. You call this your home, but he was my husband." She stepped forward, her expression twisting. "Your husband?" She spat the word like it was poison. "He was mine, too. He loved me. He loved us. You think he stayed with you out of love? No. He stayed because he was trapped. By duty, by reputation. I was the one he chose, Mary. Not you." Her words cut me clean through, but I stood my ground. I wasn't going to let her see me crumble. Not now. Not after finding this nest of lies. You can spin it however you want, I said, my voice shaking but strong. At the end of the day, it was me he stood beside in front of God and the church. Me who kept our house together when the bills piled up. Me who buried his mama and sat through his daddy's funeral. He lied to us both, don't you see? You weren't special. You were just another secret he couldn't live without. Her eyes glistened, and for a fleeting second, I thought I saw pain there, but it hardened quick. She straightened her shoulders. You don't belong here. Whatever he left you in that will, it doesn't give you the right to walk into this house like you own it. This life was his real life, with us. You were just the cover. Her words felt like a slap. My chest heaved, fury rising in me hotter than I'd ever felt in my 63 years. You dare stand here, I hissed, in the house he bought with money from my home, from the sweat of his brow I supported, and tell me I don't belong? Woman, I gave him 40 years. And you gave him what? Lies and stolen time? Before she could answer, another voice broke the air. Mom? Who is that? I turned, my whole body stiffening. A young woman stood in the hallway, her eyes wide, confusion etched across her face. She was tall, slender, her curls framing her face, and God help me, she looked like Charles. Every feature, from her nose to the way her eyebrows furrowed when she was puzzled, screamed his blood. The woman beside me straightened, her voice softening. Baby, go back to your room. But the girl didn't move. She stepped closer, her eyes darting between me and her mother. Who is she? She asked again, her voice trembling. I swallowed hard, my heart sinking. The words came out before I could stop them. I'm his wife. The girl's mouth fell open. She shook her head like she couldn't believe it. That's not true. You can't be. My mama's his wife. I felt the room spin. Charles hadn't just lied to me. He had lied to her too, lied so deep that she believed her mama was the only woman he ever vowed himself to. He'd given us both different versions of himself, splitting his life down the middle, leaving us standing on opposite sides of the same wound. The girl's eyes welled with tears, but she blinked them back and stepped further inside, her gaze fixed on me, steady, burning with the fire of youth. You need to leave. This is our house, my father's house. You don't belong here. Her words stabbed me clean through, each syllable heavier than the last. 40 years of loyalty, of sacrifices, of holding my tongue while he locked me out of this place. And now his daughter, a stranger to me but bound by his blood, was looking me dead in the eye and declaring that I was the intruder. I stared at her, my mouth dry, my heart breaking all over again, because in that moment I realized something chilling. Not only had Charles betrayed me, but his other family was ready to erase me completely. I don't remember how long we stood there, 3 women bound together by one man's lies, his wife, his mistress, and his daughter. The silence pressed down so heavy I thought it might suffocate me. The young woman's words still echoed in my ears. You don't belong here. I wanted to scream, to shout, to claw the truth into the walls until the whole house knew who I was. But instead, I drew in a long, shaky breath and steadied myself. Listen to me, I said, my voice low, almost trembling but steady enough to carry. I am Mrs. Mary Jackson. I married Charles in 1979 at St. Paul Baptist Church. We raised 2 children together. He was my husband in the eyes of God, in the eyes of the law, and in the eyes of this whole town. That is who I am. The girl's face hardened. And I am his daughter, she snapped back. The one he loved, the one he took care of. Where was that love with you? Her mama put a hand on her arm, trying to calm her, but the damage was already done. Those words cracked through me like thunder splitting the sky. It didn't matter what I said, what proof I held, how many years I had spent bending my back and breaking my spirit for Charles. In their eyes, I was the shadow. the lie, the obstacle to the life he'd built here. Later that week, when we gathered again at the lawyer's office, that truth hit me all over again. We sat on opposite sides of the table, me and my children on one, them on the other. My son James leaned forward, his jaw tight, his voice low in my ear. "Mama, don't let them push you. Whatever Daddy had with them, the law's on your side." But when the lawyer began to read, my stomach dropped. Charles had split everything. Our home, the savings, the pension. He had carved pieces of it off like slices of cake and handed them to his other family. That house I'd just walked into, legally it was mine, but half of his other assets, the bank accounts, even part of the land we'd paid off together, he had left in their names. Loretta gasped. How could he? And across the table, the mistress smiled faintly, like she had been waiting for this moment her whole life. The daughter sat stiff, staring at me with those same cold eyes that mirrored her father's when he was angry. The lawyer droned on, dividing up the pieces of a man who had lived 2 lives, but all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. 40 years, and he had dared to cut me down in his final words, daring to put us side by side like equals when there had never been any equality in the betrayal. When the reading ended, I stood on shaky legs, ready to walk out, to breathe air that wasn't poisoned with his lies. But then I heard it. The girl's voice. Strong, clear, cutting through the room. She doesn't deserve any of it. The room froze. My daughter Loretta shot up from her chair, fire in her eyes. Don't you dare talk to my mama like that. But the girl didn't back down. She pointed at me, her hands trembling with fury. He told us everything. How she made his life miserable. How she never supported him, never cared about what he wanted. He gave us this because we were his real family. She's just bitter because she's not enough. The words sliced deeper than any knife. Loretta shouted, James cursed, and the room erupted into chaos. The deep mistress rose slowly, her voice calm but deadly. Take what you were given and be grateful. Because if you try to take more, if you think you can strip this from us, you'll regret it. Her threat hung heavy in the air. I stared at her, then at the young woman glaring at me like I was some stranger trespassing in her life. My own children pulled me close, their hands gripping my arms, but all I could feel was the weight of that threat settling into my bones. For decades I had been silent, obedient, swallowing betrayal to keep the peace. But as I stood there in that office, Charles's keys burning a hole in my purse, I realized something. The fight wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The days after that lawyer's meeting passed in a haze. I'd sit in my kitchen staring at my own walls, the house Charles and I had built together, and it felt smaller than it ever had. Every corner whispered his lies. Every photo frame, every dent in the furniture seemed to mock me. I kept replaying the words from that girl, his daughter, over and over. You don't deserve any of it. Lord, if only she knew. If only she understood what it meant to give your life to a man who kept his soul chained somewhere else. I couldn't sit still. Something in me had snapped, and now I needed the truth. Every scrap of it. I dug through the old desk drawers where Charles used to toss receipts and bills. Most of it was ordinary, water bills, pay stubs, letters from the bank. But then I found envelopes tucked away in the back, bound with a rubber band. Inside were letters, not to me, to her. My dearest Anna, they began. The words made bile rise in my throat. Tender words, sweet words, words I hadn't heard in decades. He wrote about missing her, about the joy she brought him, about the life he wished he could live with her openly. And worse, he mentioned me. He painted me as bitter, cold, ungrateful, said he stayed with me only for appearances, for the sake of our children. I pressed the paper so hard my hands shook. He had stolen my loyalty, my sacrifices, and twisted them into excuses to justify his own sin. I found more evidence tucked into bank statements, accounts I'd never seen before, in names that weren't mine. Transfers, deposits, checks written to the second household, money that should have paid for Loretta's tuition, for James's braces, for the mortgage when we were scraping by. He'd been funneling it away for years, keeping 2 lives afloat while I pinched pennies at home. I slammed the drawer shut so hard the lamp rattled. My whole body trembled with rage. And it wasn't just money, it was people too. I called an old neighbor, Mrs. Williams, the kind who'd lived long enough to see everyone's comings and goings. Her voice crackled on the line. "Baby, you mean to tell me you didn't know? We saw him over there on Pine Street every week. Thought you just accepted it." "Accepted it?" I whispered. My voice cracked. Men do what they do. Folks don't always talk about it, but we see. We thought you were turning a blind eye." I thanked her, hung up, and sat there shaking. My neighbors had known. People had seen. I had been the only fool, standing in the dark while the whole world smirked behind its hand. And then, one evening, as I sat at the table with papers spread all around me, Loretta found me. "Mama, what is all this?" she asked, her eyes wide at the mess of bank statements, letters, receipts. "It's the truth," I said, my voice hoarse. "Your daddy wasn't the man we thought he was. He wasn't just keeping a house. He was keeping a family that thinks I don't deserve nothing." Loretta pressed her lips together, fury flashing in her eyes. "So what do we do?" Her words hung there. What do we do? For decades, my answer would have been, nothing. Stay quiet, keep the peace. Let him have his secrets while I swallowed my pride. But Charles was gone now. The only thing left of him was his betrayal and the people who benefited from it. I leaned forward, my voice low. "We fight." James came the next day, his face hard, his jaw set like his father's, but without the lies. Together, the 3 of us began pulling everything apart, checking deed records, tracing bank accounts, digging through boxes in the attic where Charles thought I'd never look. And the deeper we dug, the uglier it got. He hadn't just cheated me, he had stolen from me. Documents with forged signatures, my name written in his sloppy scrawl, transferring assets, signing checks, opening accounts. My husband had crossed lines I didn't even know existed. I sat there one night, papers scattered like snow across the dining table, Loretta pacing, James rubbing his forehead, and it hit me. If he could lie to me this deep, who else had he lied to? The bank? The IRS? The very law itself? I whispered into the silence, he built his whole kingdom on lies. And somewhere deep in my chest, where grief had burned a hollow hole, I felt something new stir. Not just anger, not just heartbreak, resolve. I was done being the woman left in the dark. I was done being erased, silenced, pushed aside. If his other family wanted a war over what he left behind, then so be it. Because I had just found the weapons I needed to fight. I thought I had seen the worst of it. The lies, the forged papers, the bank accounts, bleeding money into another household. But betrayal is never quiet. It keeps crawling out, clawing its way into the light, until you either bury it or let it bury you. It all came to a head one Sunday afternoon. The family had gathered after church at my house. Loretta brought her kids, James came with his wife, and even some cousins stopped by. We sat around my dining table, the same table Charles and I had bought secondhand when we first married, back when every meal felt like a victory against hunger. But instead of joy, there was tension, heavy, choking tension, because for the first time since the will, Charles's other family showed up. The mistress walked in, bold as brass, head high like she had every right to stand in my home, and behind her came that girl, his other daughter. She carried herself with the same proud defiance I'd seen in Charles when he was cornered. The room went still. My grandchildren froze mid-bite, forks clinking against plates. Loretta stiffened beside me, her eyes narrowing into slits. James muttered a curse under his breath. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice low but sharp. The woman smiled, setting her purse down on the table like she owned the place. We came to talk, to make things clear." Loretta slammed her hand on the table. "You got no business here. This is my mama's home." But the mistress only looked at me. "Mary, fighting won't bring him back. Charles wanted us taken care of, and that's what he arranged. If you were smart, you'd accept what's yours and let us live in peace." "Peace?" The word ripped from my throat, raw and jagged. "You call this peace? Sneaking around for decades, raising his child in secret, living off money that should have fed my family?" Her daughter, his daughter, spoke up then, her voice tight with anger. "He loved us. You were just the woman on paper. Everyone knows it. He told me stories about how cold you were, how you never cared what he wanted. He stayed with you because he had to. But with us, he was happy." Her words hit harder than any slap. My hands trembled so bad I had to clutch the edge of the table to keep steady. I looked around, my family staring, hurt and confused, their faces red with anger. My grandchildren wide-eyed, too young to understand, but old enough to feel the tension crackling like a storm. And in that moment, something inside me broke. For years I had swallowed my pride, endured humiliation, silenced myself in the name of keeping the family whole. I had sacrificed my voice, my peace, my joy. And now, even in death, Charles had found a way to let his lies live louder than my truth. I rose slowly, pushing back my chair. My hands shook, but my voice came out steady, strong in a way it hadn't been in years. "You will not stand in my house and call me less than what I am. I was his wife. I am the woman who bore his children, buried his kin, and carried his burdens when he was too weak to carry them himself. I pointed at the mistress, my voice sharp as steel. "You were a secret. You lived in the shadows because that's all he ever promised you. Don't twist it into more." The mistress's face flushed, but I didn't let her speak. I turned to the girl, her eyes blazing. "And you, child, you didn't ask for this. You didn't ask to be born into a lie. But don't you ever stand here and try to erase me. Don't you dare, because if you think your father's lies can rewrite my life, you're wrong." The room erupted. Loretta shouted. James stood to his feet, chairs scraping the floor. My cousins muttered prayers under their breath, while my grandchildren clung to their mothers. The mistress snapped back at me, her voice shrill, threatening lawyers and lawsuits. Her daughter pointed a finger at me, her words seething. "If you don't walk away, you'll regret it." That was it. The breaking point. I felt the heat rise in my chest, burning through years of silence, years of fear. I leaned across the table, my eyes locked on hers. I've regretted enough in my life, but staying silent now, that won't be one of them. You want a war? Baby, you just found one. The room fell into stunned silence. My own children turned to me, shock on their faces. For the first time in my life, I hadn't held my tongue. I hadn't backed down. I straightened, my hands no longer trembling, my voice calm but firm. "Get out of my house." The mistress gathered her purse slowly, her daughter glaring at me with fire in her eyes. As they walked out, she leaned close and whispered in my ear, her voice like ice. "This isn't over." The door slammed behind them, and my knees nearly buckled. But even as my family rushed to steady me, I knew something had changed. I wasn't the same woman who had walked into that house clutching keys and trembling with fear. I was ready to fight. After that Sunday showdown, the house felt different. No longer was it just a place where I cooked meals and prayed over my children. It had become a war room. My dining table turned into a battlefield, littered with papers, receipts, bank statements, and every scrap of evidence I had dug out of Charles's lies. Loretta sat across from me, her face hard, her pen scratching notes as fast as I spoke. James stood by the window, pacing, his arms crossed tight across his chest. "Mama," he said, his voice low, "if they want to fight, then we'll fight. But we need more than anger. We need proof." Proof. That word stuck in my head like a drumbeat. For years, I had nothing but suspicions, whispers, shadows. But now I had more than that. I had letters with his handwriting, forged documents with my name signed where I never signed it, bank transfers I never authorized. Still, I knew rage alone couldn't win this battle. I needed allies. So I made a call to a woman I hadn't spoken to in years, an old friend named Beverly who worked at the courthouse. She was one of those women who always knew things before anyone else. We met at a diner on the edge of town, me stirring cold coffee while she leaned in close. "I shouldn't even be telling you this," Beverly whispered, glancing around. "But Charles moved assets illegally. He signed your name on more than one transfer. That's fraud. If you push this, the law will side with you, not them." Fraud. The word sent a chill through me. My husband, the man who had lectured me about honesty, about loyalty, about keeping a woman's place in the home, had been out here breaking laws just to protect his secret life. I thanked Beverly, hugged her tight, and promised to keep her name out of it. When I got home, I told James and Loretta everything. My son slammed his fist on the table so hard the plates rattled. "Then we nail them with it. We don't just fight, we burn this whole web down." That night, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades: power. Not because I wanted revenge alone, but because I finally had the tools to defend myself. Charles had left me scraps, but in his arrogance, he also left me evidence. I hired a lawyer of my own, a sharp man with gray hair and eyes like ice. He flipped through the documents with quick fingers, his lips pressed thin. "Mrs. Jackson," he said finally, "your late husband committed fraud. That second family may think they have claims, but if we present this to the court, their inheritance could be frozen, maybe even stripped. It'll take time, but we can build a case. The law's on your side here." His words were a balm to the ache in my chest. For the first time since Charles's death, I wasn't stumbling in the dark. I was laying a path forward. In the weeks that followed, I moved like a woman possessed. I tracked every document, every transaction. Loretta dug through boxes in the attic, finding letters and receipts Charles must have thought I'd never see. James spoke to old co-workers of his father's, men who admitted, quietly, reluctantly, that they'd known about his other life for years. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together, and with every discovery, my anger hardened into resolve. But revenge isn't just about lawyers and courts. It's about timing, about letting the enemy believe they still have the upper hand until the moment you pull the rug out from under them. So when the mistress called me one evening, her voice smug as ever, telling me I should accept my half and walk away quietly, I bit my tongue. I let her think I was defeated. I said, my voice calm, almost weary. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I'll just take what's mine and leave it be." She laughed, triumphant, before hanging up. But the moment I set that phone down, a fire lit in my chest. I wasn't walking away. No, I was building my trap, brick by brick, lie by lie, ready to catch them in the same net Charles had spun around me. I stood by the window that night, the moonlight spilling across my face, and I whispered into the empty room, "Charles, you tried to silence me. You tried to erase me, but you forgot one thing. I'm still here, and I'm coming for every piece of what you tried to steal." The shadows didn't answer, but I swear I felt something shift inside me. The war had begun, and this time, I wasn't the one hiding. The day finally came when I stopped being the quiet, grieving widow and became the storm. I sat in the lawyer's office, the mistress across from me, her daughter at her side. They looked smug, confident, so sure I'd fold like paper under the weight of their presence. My own children flanked me, Loretta on my right, James on my left, both of them like anchors keeping me upright. My lawyer shuffled the thick stack of documents we had gathered, his face unreadable. The mistress leaned forward, her voice syrupy but sharp. "Mary, you could save yourself a lot of trouble if you just accept what Charles left you. You're too old to be fighting battles like this." Her daughter smirked, adding, "Besides, we all know who he really loved. You can't fight the truth." I kept my gaze steady, my hands folded in my lap. Once those words might have broken me, but not now, not after everything I'd uncovered. My lawyer cleared his throat, sliding a folder across the table. "Actually, we can fight the truth, because the truth isn't what you think it is. Mrs. Jackson has evidence of fraud, clear, documented fraud. Bank accounts opened under her name that she never authorized, transfers signed with her forged signature, funds funneled directly into this property and into your hands." The mistress's face paled. She glanced at her daughter, who frowned, suddenly unsure. The lawyer went on, his voice cutting sharp. "We've filed motions to freeze every asset connected to these accounts. Until this is resolved, you will not be touching a dime. In fact, depending on how the investigation proceeds, you could both be facing charges." I leaned forward then, my eyes locking on hers. My voice was low, steady, but it carried the weight of every year I had been silent. "You thought you could erase me, that he could leave me in the dark forever. But your whole life here? It was built on lies, and lies don't last." For the first time, I saw fear flicker across her face. Her lips pressed tight, her hands trembling where they clutched the edge of her chair. Her daughter tried to recover, her chin lifting in defiance. "This doesn't change the fact that he loved us, that he wanted us." I nodded slowly, the ache still there but dulled by resolve. "Maybe he did. Maybe he gave you pieces of himself, but love without truth is just poison, and now you're choking on it." The room fell into silence, heavy and sharp. My lawyer stacked the documents neatly, his voice calm. "We'll see you in court." We walked out together, my children flanking me, the air outside hitting my face like fresh breath after years underwater. I felt lighter somehow, even with the battle still ahead. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to Charles's lies. I was dismantling them. That night, the phone rang. It was the mistress. Her voice was brittle, frayed at the edges. "Mary," she whispered, "maybe we can come to some kind of arrangement. You don't want this dragged out, for your family's sake." I closed my eyes, listening to her desperation. Once upon a time, I might have pitied her. Might have even seen her as a victim of his lies like I was. But pity doesn't erase betrayal. And she had stood in my face, bold as sin, calling me less than what I was. "No," I said simply. "The days of me keeping quiet are over. You'll face this just like I did. For 40 years. I hung up before she could answer. 2 days later, it happened. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping my morning coffee, when I heard the sound of sirens wailing down the street. My heart raced as I stepped onto the porch. Police cars pulled up in front of the mistress's house. I watched from across the way, clutching my mug, as officers walked her out in handcuffs. Her daughter stood on the porch, shouting, tears streaming down her face. But it didn't matter. The law had finally caught up. James came up behind me, resting a hand on my shoulder. "You did it, Mama." But I shook my head, my eyes still fixed on the scene across the street. "No," I said softly. "The truth did it. I just stopped running from it." And in that moment, as the sirens faded and the neighbors whispered, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. I felt free. The morning after the arrest, the whole neighborhood was buzzing. Folks who had whispered behind my back for years now whispered about them, about the mistress being hauled out in handcuffs, about the daughter crying on the porch while the officers searched the house. For the first time in decades, the shame wasn't on me. It wasn't my burden to carry anymore. I sat at my kitchen table sipping coffee, watching the sunlight spill across the floor. My hands still trembled, but not from fear, from relief, from release. Loretta came in, setting her purse down. "Mama," she said softly, "they froze everything. Their accounts, their property, gone. The lawyer said the court recognized the fraud. It's all coming back to you." I stared down into my cup, letting her words sink in, coming back to me. For so long, I'd been losing years, losing respect, losing my husband to lies I couldn't name. And now the scales had tipped. But it wasn't about the money, not really. That afternoon, I went to the cemetery. The air was cool, the wind carrying the smell of freshly cut grass. I walked to his grave, my steps slow, deliberate, until I stood before the stone with his name etched deep. "Charles," I whispered, my voice cracking. "You thought you could hide everything from me. Thought you could split your life in two and I'd never know. Well, I know now. And I'm not the woman you left behind. I'm stronger than you ever let me believe." I laid my hand on the cold stone, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. "You lied to me. You lied to her. You lied to everyone. But lies don't last, Charles. The truth always finds its way out, and when it does, it burns everything down, even you." The wind rustled through the trees, almost like a sigh. I closed my eyes, letting the silence wrap around me. When I opened them, I felt lighter. I wasn't speaking to him anymore. I was speaking to myself, releasing him, releasing the years of silence. Later that week, the mistress stood before a judge. Fraud, embezzlement, forgery, every charge laid out in black and white. Her face was pale, her hands shaking, the confidence stripped clean away. The daughter sat behind her, silent, her eyes red from crying. And I sat there too, my children beside me, my head held high. The judge's gavel came down, guilty, sentenced, assets seized. It wasn't joy that washed over me. It was justice, poetic justice. Because for decades, Charles had held the keys to that house, to his secrets, to his betrayal, and in the end, those same keys had unlocked the truth that destroyed his lies. As we left the courthouse, neighbors stopped me in the street, some nodding, some whispering, some even apologizing for never telling me what they knew. I didn't need their pity. I didn't need their words. All I needed was the peace that came with knowing I had survived. That night, I stood at the window of my bedroom, looking out at the world Charles had tried to divide me from. My reflection stared back, older, lined, but strong. My voice, steady and certain, rose in the quiet room. "I am Mary Jackson. I was his wife, and I am still standing." For the first time in a long time, I slept without fear, without bitterness choking me, because justice had been served. But I also knew one thing more. I wasn't finished yet. There was still one place left to claim, the house. The one he had barred me from for nearly 40 years. The one that was mine now, not by his will, not by his lies, but by my survival. The first time I drove back to that house after the trial, the sky was heavy with clouds, the kind that hang low and gray, like they're carrying the weight of everything unsaid. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, the keys sitting in the passenger seat beside me like silent witnesses. For years they had been a chain, locking me out of truth. Now they were mine. When I pulled into the driveway, I didn't feel fear anymore. I didn't feel like an intruder creeping into someone else's world. I felt something else. Ownership. Power. A kind of peace I hadn't known since I was a girl. The front yard was still tended, though the flowers drooped, unwatered these past weeks. I walked slowly to the porch, running my hand along the railing, the wood smooth beneath my fingertips. I could almost see Charles here, sneaking away, building a life on lies. But I didn't let the anger rise this time. I took a deep breath, lifted my chin, and stepped inside. The house smelled the same, lemon cleaner, faint perfume, but the warmth was gone. It felt hollow now, stripped of the illusions that had once bound it. The photographs had been taken down as evidence. The furniture sat bare, and the silence no longer carried secrets. This was no longer his house. It was mine. I wandered through each room, slowly, carefully, touching walls, opening cabinets, letting myself absorb every inch. This place had once been built to erase me, to replace me. But now it would carry my story. I stood in the bedroom where I had first found those pictures, the lies that nearly broke me. The quilt still lay on the bed, stitched with sunflowers. I sat down on its edge and whispered, "You thought this would destroy me, Charles. You thought your silence was stronger than my truth. But here I am." Tears slid down my cheeks, but they weren't bitter this time. They were cleansing. Over the weeks that followed, I began making the house my own. Loretta and James helped me repaint the walls, stripping away colors that belonged to strangers. My grandchildren ran through the halls, their laughter filling spaces that had once held whispers. We planted fresh flowers in the yard, bright marigolds my favorite. Every nail I hammered, every brushstroke I painted, felt like reclaiming another piece of myself. I wasn't just fixing a house, I was building a legacy. Neighbors walked by, some stopping to chat, some still too ashamed to meet my eye. But I held my head high. Let them talk. Let them whisper. I wasn't the woman hiding in the dark anymore. One evening, as the sun set and the house glowed gold in the light, I gathered my family around the dining table. The same table Charles had once used to divide us, now full with food and laughter. I raised my glass, my voice steady. "To truth," I said, "to survival, and to taking back what's ours." They clinked their glasses with mine, smiles soft, tears shining in their eyes. For the first time in a long time, I felt whole. Later that night, when everyone had gone home, I sat alone on the porch, the cool air brushing my face. I thought about all the women like me, wives, mothers, grandmothers, who had kept quiet, who had carried the weight of men's lies just to keep their families together. I thought about how many of them never got their justice, never found their voice. And I whispered into the night, I tell my story for them too. Because this wasn't just about Charles anymore. It was about me, about my strength, about refusing to be erased. The house behind me wasn't a monument to betrayal anymore. It was a testament to survival. My survival. I closed my eyes, let the peace settle in my chest, and for the first time in 4 decades, I felt free. Would you forgive a betrayal this deep? Or would you fight the way I did? Tell me where you're watching from and let me know.